Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm McKenna. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas, and we have had a busy virtual event day for those of you who have been watching. I think we're on authors 8 and 9 or something like that. We've had a packed schedule, but I am especially excited tonight because I am talking to two authors that I've never met in person. That never happens. I don't know how Kate White and I haven't met in person before, but it's delightful to get to meet her virtually and also to meet John Searles here tonight as well. Before I bring them on, I just want to mention that, as usual, we have a packed event calendar. You can find all of that information at murderbooks.com. You can also find all of our upcoming events on our Facebook page. If you're watching and you have any questions, if you're watching on YouTube, pop them in the live chat. And on Facebook, you can just put them in the comments, and I'll get to them on the second half of this chat. Don't be shy. There's no such thing as a dumb question, or if there is, we won't call you out on it. I will also add that, as usual, for more information about either author or their books, or to order books, which we always appreciate, I've just dropped a link in the live chat in the comments. So for more information, you've got that information right there. Okay, so let's start with Kate White. Good evening, Kate.
Hey, McKenna. Great.
So nice to meet you.
Yes, I can't believe it. I can't believe it either.
I know. It's crazy. It's crazy. We have all the mutual friends in the world, and I was excited to log on tonight and get to see you. Let me do your official bio really quickly, and then we'll bring on John. Kate White is the New York Times bestselling author of 7 standalone psychological thrillers, as well as 8 Bailey Wiggins mysteries, including Such a Perfect Wife, which was nominated for a 2019 International Thriller Writers Award. The former editor-in-chief of Cosmopolitan magazine, Kate is also the editor of the Mystery Writers of America cookbook. She divides her time between New York City and Las Flores, Uruguay, and she's here tonight to talk about her brand new book, The Fiancé. So happy release day. We're so excited to have you.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here. And even though this is my 15th book, it's always so exciting to, pub week. It's a big deal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Everyone is like a new child out into the world. So congratulations again. We're also joined by John Searles. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course, it's a pleasure. So John Searles is the author of the bestsellers Boys Still Missing and Strange But True. He appears as a book critic on NBC's Today Show, and his essays have been published in the New York Times and the Washington Post. He has a master's degree in creative writing from New York University and lives in New York City. And his most recent book, if I understand correctly, is Help for the Haunted, which we, of course, always have copies of. So I'm going to leave you two to chat. If you have any issues, you need me, just call me back on, and I'll be back on here in a little bit with audience questions. Have fun.
Thanks, McKenna.
Thanks,
John.
So much. Kate. Well, the first thing, can I go first? I was thinking today, and I thought it would be interesting to tell people how we met. I don't know if you remember how we met, but I was at a restaurant with the book editor of Red Book magazine, where I used to read what they called the slush pile fiction submissions. And you came into the restaurant, we were briefly introduced, and then at the end of the lunch, the waiter informed us that you had bought our lunch. And you said, I don't know why, I just have a feeling about you. I wanted to buy your lunch. And lo and behold, 20-something years later, not only did you and I work together for a million years, we've been dear, dear friends for so many years. So I don't know if you remember that, but it came to me today while I was watching.
How can I freaking forget it? I don't pick up the tab that often. No, I remember my book editor was having lunch with this guy, and I look over, and once in a while in life, I have this magical moment with someone where I just have this chemistry, and I feel I have to know that person. And when I saw you, I felt that way about you. And so I just said to the maitre d', I'm going to pick up their bill.
Oh, it was very sweet. People are watching this are going to be like, all right, get a room, you two.
Yeah, we were definitely work spouses for sure.
We really were. So I want to, though, as much as I want to say that, I want you to be able to talk about the plot of your new book, because we're here to celebrate it, which is the fiance, with a fabulous cover. And the thing I really noticed when I was reading it that I love the accent is in blood over the E. It's a great cover. And do you want to tell people what it's about?
Sure. Thank you, John. I just happen to have a copy myself here. Yeah. This is what is sometimes called a locked room mystery because it happens all in one location, and it's a story of a family vacation and in this bucolic estate that goes horribly awry when one person in the family ends up dead. And there are two parents, kind of a matriarch and patriarch, who are in their early 70s, four sons, three wives, and then this new woman, Hannah, who is going to be the fiance. And what makes it a little different than other locked room mysteries, like if you think of something like, And Then There Were None, Agatha Christie's great locked room mystery. Not that I'm comparing myself to her, but in my dreams only. She created this suspense, this mystery, and it was also a fabulous movie where people start to drop off and everyone's terrified because they're on an island and they think they're going to be next. And they're right. What's different about this one is that Summer, the protagonist, is the only person that begins to suspect that the reason for this family member's death wasn't natural causes. Everyone else thinks that, but it's foul play. And she begins to think that Hannah, the fiance, may be responsible in some way. So part of what she has to do is not just figure out what's going on, but try to convince her husband that there's an issue there.
Well,
a serious issue.
No better way to start a book than with a dead body. And I think the dead body appears on page 2 or page 3. And I was wondering, is that the first scene you wrote, or what was the first scene you wrote for the book?
Well, the reason a body appears so early is because it's a prologue. And the reason I did it, I don't often write a prologue, but I just felt with this book, I wanted it to open with Summer and her husband going to this estate and sort of setting it so that you have a sense of their largesse and how well-to-do they are and how much Summer is looking forward to this. She loves this family. She finds her in-laws and the rest of the family so enchanting for her. And she is just sort of a sucker for all of it. And so I wanted to set that up, but I thought, boy, that's not going to be very much of a page turner in the classic mystery sense, because it's going to be a little while till you find out that Summer's an actress, so I can say something's rotten in Denmark.
Yeah.
And so I thought if I do a prologue that takes you to something that's going to happen later in the book, then that sort of sets the scene for this isn't just going to be a lot of pretty food and rosé wine, that something really awful is going to happen.
It really works because you're immediately hooked and you use the nail polish and everything. So you get right into it and set the tone of it. And more than I've read many, many of your books, and more than your other books, you juggle skillfully a lot of characters. There are more, or maybe, are there other books where you've done as many characters? I guess it's the locked room. They're all there for a weekend, but somehow you clearly delineate them. And I was really admiring your skill doing it because you kind of really know who each couple is, who everyone is, who the parents are. Was it a struggle doing that, or it's a lot of
in the first draft, I felt that two of the brothers, I hadn't differentiated them enough. And so I worked hard to do that. And I think I've had as many suspects in other books, but they're not all in the same location. So that was a challenge because they're all there. They're all appearing at the same time. When Summer arrives, everybody's already there. So I really did need to work hard. And I did a lot of kind of sketching in my notebook of how the brothers differed from each other. and for some of it, I just used things that I knew about. I have 5 brothers, by the way, but I didn't. Didn't borrow from any of them for this. But I did think about birth order and how, the oldest son is sort of a good citizen, and the youngest son is definitely kind of the golden boy. And so I worked a little bit with that. I did a little research on birth order too. My editor actually asked me, do I want to cut one of a brother, make it just 3 brothers? And I said no, because then I would cut his wife, and then there's too few suspects. And
Yeah.
I think when you have a locked room, it's fun to, if you can differentiate the characters enough, to have plenty of suspects.
And I think
Like
it's
Knives Out, I thought, I loved that movie, and I think people did, and there were plenty of suspects there.
I actually thought about Knives Out, and I thought about that movie Get Out too, because it opens with them driving there, and your book opens with them driving, and Gabe and the Summer kind of talking about the weekend and what it's going to be, and that's how that book opens. And then there was some other movie I watched in the last year during the pandemic, but I have major pandemic fog and can never remember anything. There was some movie that I thought also opened with them driving to the weekend. So it really, the pacing is fantastic, Kate. It opens with the dead body very quickly, and then you want to know, you meet all these people and you want to know who everyone is. And pretty quickly in the first third, I don't know if I'm allowed to give something away, I won't say who, but a character dies. And I wondered, did you know that was going to happen? Because I did not know, and it came as quite a surprise to me, and I actually felt bad for that person. Did you know that was going to happen, or?
John, this is a question I'm sure you get asked all the time too. Are we plotters or are we pantsers? And for me, I usually start off with a germ of an idea. Sometimes it is a newspaper headline, or it's something somebody says to me that I think that's interesting, and then I'll play the what if game. I do not remember how this idea exactly came to me, but I remember first thinking I want to do something about a family where somebody comes in and upsets the ecosystem. And then shortly thereafter, I knew who I wanted to die. And then I felt bad because I thought, I feel bad about that. But hey, we have to, yeah. Are you, I know maybe you are a plotter with a pantser rising or something. I mean,
a skirt that's rising.
Yeah, you're a combination in terms of your writing, right?
Yeah, I don't know. It's always changing things. But recently I did an event where I interviewed Christina Baker Klein, who has a new book called The Exiles, about the women who were years ago sentenced to transport to Australia. And it was a fascinating read. And early on, like in your book, a very main character dies. And I asked her about it because I found it, just like in your book, it was very surprising to me. And she said something, she heard someone say something like, I could be really paraphrasing here, but like she heard someone say, you should write a book where anything can happen. And she says, therefore I felt like anything should happen. And so I just did it. And I think it's important to be brave. And that's why I was impressed reading that plot, because I thought, wow, Kate just kind of went for it. So, but for me, yeah, I always kind of am writing toward a thing, and then I don't always, sometimes it doesn't feel realistic or something, what I have in my head, so then I have to rewrite it, and I don't know, it's a lot of trial and error for me, is what I would say.
Yeah, I feel I have to know roughly where I'm going. Like Lisa Unger told me, she never knows anything other than just the initial setup, but I have to know roughly where I'm going. I heard Laura Lippman say once, she called it the distant shore approach, where you sort of have a sense of what the distant shore is. And because I feel I have to know who the killer is. I never figure out the killer 3/4 of the way through. I know who the killer is.
Changed it? In any of your books, have you ever had that you knew who the killer was going to be? So you've always stayed. That's good then.
Yeah.
You know what you're doing.
Because I think you just, for me, that's an important starting point. But as I'm sure you discovered too, part of the fun of writing is the magic of, as you're writing, even if you have a rough idea where you're going, things just happen in your brain. And all of a sudden, characters do things you didn't know they were going to do. And that's one of the things I love about it, because sometimes you're just sitting there and you're like, wow, look what you just did. And I didn't know you were going to do that.
I know. There are some, I know I've heard writers say, like, my characters come to life and sit across my kitchen table and talk to me. And I'm always like, that doesn't happen to me. But it does happen exactly what you're saying. You get an idea and you think, oh my gosh, I didn't even think of that. And then you're just, it's so much more exciting. And, you know, there are certain writers who write to such an outline that to me it would seem too restrictive, but also being too loose about it could be a little too frightening. But I wanted to ask, because I've been very fortunate to have visited your home in Pennsylvania, which is a beautiful, beautiful home. And the whole time I was picturing your house as I was reading the book. So and I'm trying to remember, in the past, have you used settings that, I mean, I don't know, were you thinking of your home as you wrote it, or in Pennsylvania?
Well, I guess I just started to think, if I'm going to do it on an estate, why don't I base it in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, where we have this weekend home? And then I just sort of took our house and put it on steroids and created this whole estate. And I did some research, because the matriarch is a landscape architect and a landscape designer, and that's what she's done professionally, even though she's pretty much retired now in her early 70s. And I did a lot of research on beautiful landscaping and estates, and it's not that it gets, I hope it doesn't get bogged down in that, because there isn't a ton on it, but I just felt like I started with a place I know and then just blew it out. You know, one really weird thing happened to me with my last book. I set this book from last year, Have You Seen Me, in an apartment on the west side of Manhattan, near Lincoln Center. And I wanted the character, who is a financial journalist, to, she's like a freelance personal finance writer. I wanted her to have an office in her home, but I didn't want to give him a 3-bedroom. So I said there was an alcove off her bedroom. And in high-rise buildings in New York, new buildings, you never see that kind of setup. Well, after I had turned the book in, my husband and I decided, after many years living on the East Side, that we were going to move. And I now live in an apartment that's very similar, almost identical to the one in my book. Plus, it's not only in the same area, it's got an alcove off the bedroom, which is really unusual. And that was the spookiest thing for me, to have something come to life. Have you ever had that happen, where something you wrote somewhat came to life?
I worried about. Well, I always joke that my mom always thinks she's every mother in every book. So, like, she'll be like, why did you make me such a horror in that book? I'm like, Mom, it's not you. Or, why did you make me so heavy? I didn't gain that way. I have that certain things I've written about, then, yeah, they come true. I can't even think of an example as clear as yours, but things where I get an eerie sense of, like, wow, that's similar to what I was writing about, which is kind of a strange experience to have. So the thing I would love to talk about is that you and I have in common, if people don't mind, is Cosmo and our years working in magazines. And what people, I don't know if they know, Kate and I both juggled these jobs. Kate had a much bigger job than I did, but for years I had many different positions at Cosmo. I started as the books editor. Kate was the editor-in-chief, but we both always had this we both wanted to write books, and I was trying to write books on the side. Kate was writing career books and then began writing thrillers and mysteries. I don't know, Kate, when you look back at that time of doing both, like, what do you think? Are you like, how did I do that? Or what do you
Yeah,
think?
I want to ask you the same thing. For me, a lot of it was I always wanted to be a writer, but when I was younger, I didn't really know what kind because I wrote little plays. I wrote a little magazine that was put out in my high school. I put it out. I I love the idea of writing suspense because I'd been a huge Nancy Drew addict, all those things. And it wasn't until I was in college that I realized you just have to pick a lane. You cannot do all that kind of writing. And then I won this Glamour magazine contest for college women, and that kind of picked the lane for me. But I never wanted to give up the idea of writing suspense. And finally, I was thinking, I'm going to run out of time if I don't do it. But the tricky part for me was I did have this big full-time job, and I had 2 kids too. And I left Cosmo every day about 5:36 because I was a mom, and I would work then after the kids went to bed. So I wrote my suspense novels in the early morning before they got up. And I think partly another reason I wanted to do it was not just because I wanted to make sure I didn't want to die not having done it, but I wanted something to, like, a plan B, because magazines then could be so perilous. And so that it served another purpose for me. And so I think for me, a finding that if I got up early in the morning, I could write well in the morning. And I just wrote an hour every day. And then on weekends before the kids got up, I wrote a couple hours. And I would say to anyone who's listening, who's aspired to write fiction, the pages add up if you write every day. As John Grisham says, write every day. And I think that helped me by being methodical about it that way, because even though I wasn't writing long, I wrote every day. And what worked for you?
Nothing.
John, you not only have written these fabulous books. Strange But True was a fantastic movie. I love that movie. And you've got this big book coming out in March. So don't say nothing.
Well, I shouldn't say nothing, but I joke. But, for me, I never really planned on being a magazine editor. I went to graduate school at NYU. I got out, I wanted to be a writer. And then somehow I happened into Redbook, and then happened into a job interview at Cosmo. And I remember I didn't really think I liked it very much. And my mother said, just give it 2 weeks. Well, I worked there 20 plus years, but it was a fantastic experience. And I remember other writers saying to me, well, you should quit and write your books. But I loved it so much. I just thought, kind of like, I don't know, like falling through the rabbit hole or something, like into this strange world that was so different from anything I grew up with or where I came from. And I found it so exciting. And then you and I were such close friends, and it was really, really fun. And Kate and I have so many experiences after years of being at Cosmo in the heyday of magazines. I would say really when we were there was a fantastic time. And I was remembering today, this will go under the reckless gossip category. Well, we won't name names, but there was one time where Kate and I went to lunch with a certain actor. We won't say who. We were really looking forward to it. We went to a restaurant, and for 3
You can say actress, John. Actress, yes.
For 3.5 hours or 3 hours, she held us hostage and talked about herself non-stop.
Oh my gosh, it was so awful. We were like, get us out of here. But John,
slightly shift the conversation, but no such luck. Yeah.
I'll go back for a second. Is the reason after you got a master's in creative writing, you didn't say, hey, I'm just going to sit and write, is because you had to pay the bills, right? You couldn't just
I had to pay the bills, and I never really saw myself as, I really admire, Kate, people, so many writers like you or Laura Lippman or Lisa Unger who can do them more regularly. And I've come to accept it's not part of my DNA. And so I didn't think I can leave and and be on that schedule. And I liked my life and liked the job, and I had to pay the bills. And it was a great, exciting, interesting job that afforded me so many opportunities that I wouldn't have ever had in my life. So I feel really grateful for that time. And I feel grateful now that magazines, which is interesting because magazines, can we use the word collapsed? The industry has changed, and books are really thriving in book publishing. But why do you think that, in your opinion, that magazines haven't really lasted in the same way, but books have? Are we like,
Yeah.
I guess this is reckless gossip too, maybe.
No, it's such a good point. But could I just go back for 1 second to something you said again, for anyone who's harboring this secret desire to, hey, I would like to write a book while I still have time. I think, and I know this particularly in the last 9 years since I left Cosmo, because I finally had the time to have a lot of friends who are in the business and also in the genre of writing mysteries and thrillers, is that everybody's different. Some people write a book a year. Some people write every day. I know some really successful authors who writes for 6 months of the year, and they hole up someplace and they just don't see anyone. They write 12 hours a day. So everybody's different, and I think that's the important thing to realize. What works for you might work for somebody else, not work for somebody else. I think with magazines, it was sad to see what was happening, because part of the reason that I wanted to leave, in addition to writing suspense, was seeing what was happening with the business. That Gen X read magazines, but Gen Z was not reading them. Or Gen Y, and then certainly not Gen Z. They love content, but they're getting content from TikTok and the internet and so many places, from influencers and not necessarily authorities. And I think magazines, from what I could see after I left, they made the big mistake of bringing in a lot of internet people to run the print magazines. And that wasn't going to be the solution. They didn't know how to create an aesthetic product. And so as we were leaving, it was starting to collapse, but then it's really collapsed big time. So many magazines have folded.
And why do you think books have done so? I mean, books is just a whole different thing, because I guess books don't rely on, I can get that content on Instagram. You're like, no, you have to read the book to get the experience of it, right? Is that what you would say? Or
yeah, but I also think, the book business just still seems loaded with people who love books and know books, whereas the magazine business suddenly was loaded with people who had no experience in magazines.
Yeah, or people who just thought, I want to be Anna Wintour in a time.
Right.
Not everyone could be Anna Wintour. Yeah.
Right. That's right. Not even Anna Wintour sometimes, I guess. But it was we got to be in it, John, at a wonderful time, and I think it's also great. Do you feel, as a fiction writer, to have had experiences that inform your writing in different ways, that you got outside your head in that business, you worked with people, it was such a rule-breaking, fabulous setting, that I guess if you just, if you'd left graduate school after majoring, getting a master's in creative writing, and you had a trust fund and you just sat down to write, you might not have as much to draw on. Do you feel that's the case?
And I had no trust fund. That was for sure. It was just a great experience, and also I learned so much about the publishing business, because starting in the books department and seeing all the hundreds of books coming in. I mean, opening book packages and seeing pitch letters from agents and publishers and subsidiary rights people, and I just learned so much about, there's much more than just literary fiction. There's commercial fiction. There's all the huge nonfiction relationship category that was so big for us. And so I don't know, it's just fascinating to learn so much about publishing, and then to be a part of the world, but I'm happy now, after the years that we had, to be on the other side of it, and just to be writing books. And and how did you find writing during the pandemic, Kate? Did it shift things for you, or?
I think it felt in many ways just like any other year in terms of for me professionally, except not being able to go on a book tour last year. And I guess I did some virtual events, but not as many as this year because the system was kind of established then. But I probably had more time to be holed up in my office. And I would say coming out of the pandemic, I'm probably going to be a little bit more ruthless about my schedule and not. Yeah. Oh, God, there's a guy in my hotel room. By the way, John, just so you know, I am at the Saratoga Arms, which is this great hotel in Saratoga, New York. And I actually wrote a book about 5 or 6 years ago called The Secrets You Keep that still sells, where I set part of the book in this hotel.
Yes.
So, whenever I come back to Saratoga,
yeah,
I love to stay here because it has some very good memories for me. So for the pandemic, I guess it made me more conscious of how I do sometimes fritter part of the day away, particularly after lunch. And I love to go to lunch when all it takes is somebody to suggest it. McKenna was saying that she has a handful of questions, so maybe we should bring her in.
Yeah, sure. I've been sitting back and enjoying the chat for sure. And I think I was one of your. I'm a zennial, so I was definitely a magazine reader. I still get my In Style delivered. It just came today, so I still like my magazines. But it was a fascinating conversation. I think I was probably reading Cosmo when both of you guys were there.
Oh God!
So yeah,
we didn't corrupt you, did we, McKenna?
No, no more than anything else, Kate.
John and I wrote those cover lines together, just FYI. So blame us.
That's fantastic. Okay, so we do have a couple questions. Heidi was wondering, when in the process did you figure out who done it?
For me, I always know pretty much from the day I start the book. And I may not know a lot, but I know that. And I feel for me, it just makes it easier for me to lay down clues and also red herrings. And I like it when I read a mystery or thriller where the author's fair, that something doesn't come out of nowhere and you realize, oh my gosh, that person's really the long lost daughter of that character and we didn't know that. So I want to leave clues, but I also want to leave red herrings to make people annoyed with themselves for not guessing it. So I know from some authors who don't know who done it in the beginning, then they have to go back and put the red herrings in afterwards. And I just like weaving them in as I go.
It makes sense. How about you, John?
Well, I guess I'll say for Help for the Haunted, which opens with a young girl whose parents are these demonologists, and they get a call in the middle of the night to go to this church and where they're both murdered. And that happens in the first 10 pages, I guess. I knew who the killer was for that book, but then other books, I sort of figured it out as I went. And kind of like we were saying about Lisa Unger, I just kind of, who said the quote where it's like driving a car at night where the headlights, you can only see as far as the headlights are in front of you. And I could only see so far. So it was like following a voice and figuring it out, which has its pros and cons because it's a fun experience, but also can be really scary because you're like, what if I can't piece this together? So it depends. My answer, yeah.
And while we're talking to you about your books, I always love when we have a guest interviewer. It makes my life easy. I get to just sit back and listen. What are you working on, John? And do we have something to look forward to soon?
I have a new book coming out in March from HarperCollins called Her Last Affair. And, the last few years of my life were some sort of unfortunate events occurred. The magazine industry where I'd worked happily for 20-something years collapsed. my apartment weirdly burned down at the hands of an arsonist, which is a crazy story that I now try to tell in a funny way. And sadly, my father passed away in a motorcycle wreck. And so I had some sort of sad things happen. But my solace in the midst of so much hardship was getting up in the mornings, especially during the pandemic, and just quietly writing this book, which is called Her Last Affair and comes out in March. And it, like my other books, it's kind of psychological suspense, part character study, part it's very dark and mysterious, and it's set at an abandoned drive-in in upstate New York, where Kate is actually. I went to the Malta Drive-in, Kate, near you. The Malta Drive-in is near Searles.
Oh my gosh! Oh wow!
Research, and those people there are so nice. So thank you for asking, McKenna.
Of course, my pleasure. I certainly will look forward to it coming out. I'll start nagging our sales rep for a galley soon as it's available. Okay, here we go. Are either of you plotting mysteries using the pandemic as a framework? How about you, Kate?
That's such a good question, because not only have people asked me, but other mystery authors have asked, like, what are you going to do? I just decided I'm so sick of it, I'm not going to address it. Now, there might be a time, because I just handed a book in and got the notes back from my editor, and so you do a little work on it based on, or depending on the book, a lot based on the editor. And what I was wondering would be, there might even be a reference where somebody said, when we were, wore masks or whatever, but I don't even know. I'm just so sick of it. And yet I know other people are referencing it. I don't know if anyone is making it a framework, but definitely people are referencing it.
Yeah. How about you, John? Any interest?
Maybe, but I don't, not yet. Nothing, but I can't say no, because you never know with me.
So someone I heard early on in the pandemic, a writer said that they thought it might be like the books about 9/11 or the books about Katrina, that it would take a little time for people to process, and then those books would start coming out, even if it was finding its way into fiction as opposed to nonfiction. But the immediacy of us living through it, I certainly feel like it's not necessarily what I want to read right now, right. And don't necessarily want to write myself either. I'm just glad that we're getting out of it.
No, I was even thinking some of my books are set in New York, and I could so easily see referencing the 9/11 museum, and yet I wouldn't have referenced 9/11 in the years immediately afterwards. And I think it's the same thing about this, that it's just, I'm so happy to be mostly done with it.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so we have a really interesting question here from Gail. Seeing what has happened to the magazine industry, what do you see down the road for print books? Will newer generations prefer online books? Hope not.
One thing that just has fascinated me, having two kids who are Gen Y, they were the first generation to really strongly move into digital. My kids, in school, they got issued laptops when they were in 4th grade. So I watched my daughter go from magazine reader to phone reader, but my son reads print books. And I think that there's definitely a market for print books. It's huge, as you know, that you see it in the sales figures. There just hasn't been the fall off. And I think there's something about books that just are so special. They're just not as ephemeral as a magazine that you pick up to read on a plane or you leaf through in a dentist's office. I remember this girl saying to me in college once, books are my friends. And I think, when you have a book that you love, you want to hold on to it. I'm looking at your fabulous bookcase, McKenna. And so far, so good.
Yeah. I think one of the I'm sorry, go ahead, John.
I agree with Kate. That's all I have to say.
I think one of the interesting misconceptions throughout this whole process of ebook purchasing is that the younger generations want ebooks. It's actually, we found more of our older demographic who've made the switch to ebooks, who might like to be able to change their font size and it's easier to see or easier to hold at night. Whereas the younger readers, by and large, they get enough screen time with their phones and their laptops, and they like print books. I mean, we had someone in one time who was, her son came in, a little boy, and he just came up to the counter with this huge stack of books. And she said, "You have all these on your Kindle." And he was like, I don't want to read them on my Kindle. I want the books. Like, and they were just paperbacks. They weren't collectible hardcovers or anything, but he wanted to read, print books. And I think a lot of younger readers still enjoy that. It's just a different experience. I think the industry has proven there's room for both, but I wouldn't say it's the younger demographic who are going digital necessarily.
I think it's a book is something then that becomes so special. Like my daughter told me the other day that she was walking in the West Village and there was like some books that were older books that were being sold, and she bought that book Mouse that's about the Holocaust, and she said she just loved having that someone had told her about it once, and she just loved seeing it and she wanted to own it. And my son has a big bookcase filled with all his hardcovers that his mother has bought for him. So it's very different to see everything else. They're on their phone and they're on social, but they want books.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so to both of you, what are you currently reading? How about we give John a chance to talk? What are you reading?
Well, I've been reading The Fiancé. But before that, I read The Exiles by Christina Baker Klein, because I was doing an event with her. And before that, I read the book Writers and Lovers by Lily King, which I really, really liked so much. It was recommended to me by someone. And next, I want to read The Midnight Library, the Matthew Haig book. That's done so much.
Wonderful. Yeah. How about you, Kate?
I am reading a George Washington biography I really like. I tried, though I'm a junkie when it comes to suspense, I love to try to read other things. I just finished Jean Korlitz's The Plot, which I thought was spectacular as a thriller. And I just starting now Razorblade Tears.
Yeah, the S.A. Cosby.
Oh my gosh.
He's a writer, isn't he? Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a rock star.
Yeah. Excellent. All good recommendations. We have signed copies of Razorblade Tears coming, I think, in a couple days. He signed and personalized for us. We ship books to him. So,
and his last book just won the International Thriller.
It did.
Yeah.
Blacktop Wasteland just won the ITW award. So he is setting the crime fiction world on fire, and we're happy to see that. Okay. Got another question here from our wonderful interviewer, Sarah DeVello of Mystery and Thriller Mavens. Has your magazine careers helped you as mystery writers, and does it help you write more tightly?
Okay,
John, no, you go, John.
I think so, yeah, because part of my job at magazines was reading the many, many books that came in and knowing what was out in publishing. And I think I just also, in magazines, so much about it is keeping the reader reading and going to the next sentence. And part of that is brevity. And so I definitely think it helped me just to keep things a little leaner and to the point and keeping people hooked. You know, I got my first agent early on when I was looking for an agent. An editor at a publishing house said, "Oh, you don't need an agent, just send it to me." And so I sent it to her, and she sent back a very polite rejection letter that was almost like a form letter. But when I took the manuscript out of the box, Kate has heard me tell this story, a little scrap of paper fell out, and it was an in-house assessment of my book that was mistakenly left in the box, and it said, "I could barely make it to page 60, and I feel really badly for anyone who has to read the whole thing." I took to my bed. I was so upset. But as awful as it was actually such a lesson to me ultimately as a writer. I never want anyone to have that feeling. So I always try from the first sentence, the first page, to hook the reader and keep them going. So in all those ways, that's how I feel as a writer, that magazines did help me in my career in publishing. What about you, Kate? What about you, Kate?
Well, I think it helped me have a thick skin because, at Cosmo, you would get the numbers for a certain issue. You never want Lisa Kudrow on the cover of Cosmo. No, it didn't work. But you get a thick skin. I think you learn not to have writer's block, that you never indulge in that, because you learn that, the magazine has to go out. So what you do is you just put something down. It may not be perfect. The cover line may not be perfect, but you can tweak it. And for me, a big thing, because we interviewed tons and tons of guys, because our reader was interested in what makes guys tick, it helped me learn a lot about how guys talk and how they think, and how they think very differently than us. Be afraid, be very afraid. And so that was a big help too.
Excellent. Yeah, I think the people who come from a journalism background, it's always interesting to hear them talk about, there will be a question occasionally, what do you do about writer's block? And they say, there's no such thing as writer's block. Like, I write for my career. So it's interesting.
You just plow through.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have made it through the questions here. I'm going to ask one that's popped up a few times recently, and I like it. So just for fun, if you had to have dinner, if you got to have dinner with any literary character of your choosing, who would you like to have dinner with?
I hate questions like this because I can never narrow it down.
I'm sorry. You can narrow it down to it can be a dinner party. Just start naming people.
Kate, who would you say besides
character?
Character.
Oh gosh, I would say, maybe I could say an author.
Sure, we can change the question.
Okay, just because I read within the last year Will in the World, because James Burke mentioned it in the New York Times in an interview he did about, what's the best book anyone ever gave you as a gift? And it was Will in the World, How Shakespeare Became Shakespeare. And I read it. I just love that book, and we know so little about him. We just don't know. And I think it would be not because I wouldn't be able to carry on a conversation with him about writing, because I wouldn't be able to understand half of what he was saying. He's so brilliant. But I would want to know things like, why did you leave and never go back to your home? And, I know it doesn't seem like you liked your wife, but what was the real reason? And just so many things about him that we don't know. Was it really true that you were once a person who made gloves?
Yeah.
And all those things.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I have an English literature degree. My emphasis is in Shakespeare. And so I read all the Shakespeare authorship debate stuff, and I get nerdy about all that stuff. And that would be wonderful to be like, what actually, just tell me your life story. Let's clear some things up. Yeah. Where were you at what point in time?
Yeah. We know you married Anne Hathaway, but that's all we know.
That's about it. All right, how about you, John? You can.
I always feel like I give the wrong answer, so I'm going to just give a very different answer, because Kate said, how about authors? You know who I was thinking I miss having lunch with, that I had lunch and dinners with a few times. I saw CNN just did a documentary about her, Jackie Collins, the writer, and she used to come to town. It's a very different answer than yours, Kate, but I remember she and I were at a restaurant and she ordered creme brulee, and I'm sorry for being inappropriate, but it was Jackie Collins and I was a Cosmo editor. So I said, oh, the night I lost my virginity was the first time I ever had creme brulee. And she said, oh, really? Do you want to know when I lost my virginity? And I said, well, sure. And she said, I swept into Los Angeles. I was a wild child at the age of 19. I went to a party and there he was across a crowded room. Marlon Brando.
John, we just got some good gossip here.
I don't know why this event needs to end now.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't know. I feel like those questions like, what's your desert island book, or that I didn't really, I used to edit the astrology at Cosmo, and no matter what sign you were going to have sex. But they always said Geminis, which I am, we're very indecisive. And so as soon as I get a question where I have to pick one thing, I just go into a sheer panic. So my answer I'm just going to give is the one.
I love the Jackie Collins.
Those are great answers. Absolutely. And polar opposite answers. It's great. Yeah.
What if we put Shakespeare and Jackie Collins together? Now that could be really good.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, we can just make it a dinner party. As long as I get invited, I'm cool with it. All right. Thank you both so much.
Anna and John, thank you. John, your book, Her Last Affair, comes out in March. I can't wait for it. I love your writing. Thanks for doing this with me.
And there is The Fiancé, fresh out.
Fiancé, everybody, get your copy.
And McKenna, thank you so much for this. And I hope to meet you in person one day.
Absolutely. You're both always welcome at the store, and hopefully I'll see you soon at a conference or something. But it's been a delight. Thank you again. I'm going to go pour a glass of wine and be done for the evening. Bye.
Bye-bye.